Hey guys, Sleepy Reader here. This is going to be Sleepy Vlog number 10. Last time I did Sleepy Vlog number 11. So, because of all the drugs I did in the 60s, now I have to do Sleepy Vlog number 10. No, I didn't do any drugs in the 60s. But this might be for people who did do drugs in the 60s or wish they had. Multiple Warheads. It's kind of like a Mobius science fiction story meets some underground comics of the 60s, for a lack of a better way to explain it. I've kind of tripped up. I've started shooting this video 3 times now because each time I try to explain multiple warheads, I can't really do it. This is definitely a comic book, as you can tell from those comments, that's not for everybody. And I can't even decide if it's really for me. I didn't find myself caring about the characters or being deeply involved in it, but I was certainly impressed by a lot of its qualities, particularly the science fiction, the sort of deep science fiction feel of it, where it felt like all of this stuff kind of exists far beyond the story here, beyond the page, like it was already there, and we just sort of discover it. And that the author just has this huge, elaborate understanding of this kind of fascinating, weird future world. And I think the real point I wanted to make about it is the art is fun, and it looks fun to draw. It looks like the artist was having fun. It's one of these deceptively simple art styles. It's often there's lots of space where there aren't lines, and there's a lot of sort of simple details piled up. I think it's deceptively simple. I think it would be hard to actually do this, but maybe, not as hard as some comic book art. And it kind of stirs up that old childhood feeling of wanting to make your own comics. As a kid, I would draw, and it wasn't because I imagined I would have a career as an artist or anything. And I don't have a career as an artist, in case anyone's wondering. But I just did it to do it, because it was comics were so compelling. And looking at this stuff makes me just want to start doodling and turn it into some kind of wacky story. And maybe the thought that you can do a story without a lot of, seemingly without a lot of plot, is very tempting. And it may that even the seeming lack of plot may be something he makes look much easier than it really is. But yeah, so I don't even know if I'll get the next issue or not. It's a bargain in terms of $4 for about 50 pages of art, no ads, on really nice thick paper, beautifully colored. So I think Brendan Graham wrote, drew, and colored, and probably lettered all of it. And it's truly an eccentric kind of personal piece of work, and that also is very appealing. And so I sort of, in my head, had this kind of ridiculous, how they have sports fantasy camps, and I think they have rock and roll fantasy camps now, where people go and some old rock people, help them put together a band and maybe make a little recording. I want a comic book fantasy camp where, like there's the Joe Kubert School of Comics, but I don't have time to spend 2 years or 3 years at that. I want a 2-week camp where they teach me the basics. Some pros come in and show me the different things, a little bit of lettering, a little bit of coloring, penciling and inking, and just enough so that you could do something yourself that you would enjoy, something on a, just would be fun. I don't think that will ever happen. There is the Joe Kubert School. I saw someone's video. I guess there was a kind of Joe Kubert School through the mail. I know exactly who did it, and I can't remember the name of your YouTube channel. I'll put a link down below. He showed some really cool inks that had been done over some of his pencils by the teachers at the Joe Kubert School. Some of the inks may have been done by Joe Kubert himself, which is really cool. And Joe Kubert, not as much as Brendan Graham, but Joe Kubert was an artist who made it look kind of easy. There was something graceful and elegant and seemingly simple about his artwork. And on that note, I thought I'd mention the Joe Kubert Presents. He passed away recently, but apparently, at least they claim, finished the 6 issues of this, which is a anthology comic edited, by him, everything chosen by him, and it seems like with about half of the art, at least judging by the first issue, about half of the art and stories done by him and the other half by, I guess, old colleagues of his. And I want to say this, knocks it out of the park and that you should all go get it. And there is a really beautifully drawn and colored Hawkman story. He did his own coloring too. He may have done his own lettering because he's old school. And I really do appreciate his artwork. How to put it? When I used to do a lot of, about 10 years ago, I used to do a lot of life drawing. And you talk about the gesture, sort of capturing the essence of the drawing, the feel of the movement of the body and everything. And it seems like he's kind of a master of that. And so there's kind of a joy to his line work, really because he's captured everything just right. So, you don't need him. See that hand there? Oops. You don't need him to do all the detail of the hand because he's captured the hand perfectly. So just a few lines capture the gesture, the feel of the hand, and the proportions and everything just right. So I really loved the art in here. Unfortunately, he wrote it himself, and it's a trifle of a story, and it could have been so much more. And I wish we never will see him drawing again. And I wish we could have seen him drawing with, a really intense writer. That would have been interesting. To my knowledge, he didn't do a whole bunch with more modern writers. Actually, more interesting by him is this story called Spit, and I assume it's to be continued. It takes place in the whaling days, and it's the story of an orphan, a very downtrodden, pitiful orphan starving on the streets, who seems to be given a chance at life by being brought along on a whaling ship. By the end of this episode, we don't know ultimately what his fate on the ship will be. Let's see. That's weird. And it story-wise, it relies so heavily on these captions that's so-so. But it's all this pencil art directly reproduced, and it's beautiful and very different from the other Joe Kubert art. He could clearly do different kinds of things. So yeah, one of the many things. I mean, this. If you don't know, Joe Kubert was one of the classic Silver Age artists. I think he got his start in the Golden Age. And, by the Bronze Age, he was kind of the go-to cover artist for DC. So tons of later Silver Age and Bronze Age DC comics are drawn by him. So this cover of I, Vampire is drawn by him. And now I'm just thumbing through. I just got this I, Vampire from the library. And now I'm not finding the Joe Kubert covers. There's one. But when I watch people's videos where they're showing off DCs from from the 60s and 70s. They're just covered in Joe Kubert covers. It's kind of a shame Joe Kubert didn't, by later in his career, he was mostly the guy doing covers. They didn't do more comic strips. But he's all over the history of comics, mostly with DC. Yeah, sorry, I hate when I end up thumbing through something while I'm trying to talk to you guys. So I will stop this in just a second because I'm not finding the Joe Kubert covers that I was finding all over this collection before. There's one. And he did make it look easy, but I'm sure it wasn't, because otherwise everyone would be as good as Joe Kubert. But yeah, that just tied into my little fantasy about comic book camp. If they did a Joe Kubert school camp for 2 weeks, I might be able to get a vacation and just, learn a little bit about making my own comic books just for fun. Of course, where would I find the time to do them after that? So what Kubert says in his little essay that goes along with this book is that he did it. This is because he doesn't like the modern comic books, so they gave him the opportunity to just put together an anthology of things that he did like. And I'm afraid what he likes is kind of just very dated to my mind, not a good way, and kind of simplistic. So you get a elegantly drawn but simplistic Hawkman and Hawkgirl story, and then this thing called Angel and Ape, which is, I think it's an old, very minor DC series. And at least in here, they're presented as a detective agency of this beautiful woman named Angel and this ape. And it's drawn in this kind of 1960s Playboy comics kind of style, or that's what I think of it as. Kind of spoofy, just full of very silly jokes and no plot. So to me, it's kind of the worst of the 60s. Then there's this very good story about whaling, a short story on Spit. I don't know why the paper, when it's his pencils, is gray like this. I assume he didn't actually draw on gray paper. The color between the panels is not gray, and the cover is done on this gray paper. It maybe evokes kind of an old masters, like, before they had white paper or something in the Renaissance. Maybe they were drawing on gray paper like this. To me, it's a very odd effect, and it makes it harder to appreciate the pencils, particularly the pencils on the cover. I find it very ugly, so I don't understand that. And then the last thing in here is a kind of biographical comic by a kind of minor figure from the past of comics, Sam Glasman. And he does a memoir about his days on a aircraft carrier in World War II. And it's somewhat interesting, but awkwardly written, and does not show off the comic book medium at its best, because again, it's just a story told in captions, illustrated by Sam Glasman. I guess it's an interesting artifact. I mean, Sam Glasman is, vaguely recognize his name and remember seeing his art. But anyway, it's kind of a little touch of the past. It's interesting here to see some Joe Kubert pencils. Over here. You see how loose the pencils are. And so he did a lot of the tightening with his ink work, which is kind of, I think, a more old-fashioned way also and I think there's more to be said for old-fashioned art in comics than old-fashioned scripting. But anyway. So that also, although I kind of wished I hadn't bought it for, I paid $5 for this and it wasn't a great read. It did continue that sort of stimulation of the childhood fantasy to draw some art and to draw some comics. So, yeah, and my daughter's trying to draw comics all the time, but there I serve as her letterer, basically. Sometimes I get to draw a little bit, a character in, and I try not to overwhelm her with my grown-up way of drawing either. So I try to draw like a kid with her. I do have to say I read fairly recently, I guess as part of the hype of the new Marvel Now Deadpool, I read an interview with Tony Moore, who was the first artist on The Walking Dead, then went on to do he went on to do a really cool indie comic, and then he went on to do Ghost Rider at Marvel. And I guess he's done a bunch of other stuff. I think he did some Venom. And now he's going to be doing Deadpool. Anyway, they interviewed with him, and it really made it made the life of a comic book artist sound not fun at all. Just really long hours of work. He doesn't get to read comic books anymore. And that kind of punctured. It just didn't sound like he could enjoy comic books anymore, not only because of the long hours, but just for whatever it took to make himself into a professional level comic book artist, he couldn't enjoy it. So, I really do, in a way, money not being something I'm considering at the moment, and free time not, but I really do think if I ever did draw comics, just to do them as an amateur would be all I want, just so I can still love and enjoy comic books. Often doing things professionally ruins your sort of amateurish love for them. But yeah, I don't think, he said, even while he was saying how awful it all was, he says, it's such a crazy job, you would never do it unless you totally loved comic books. But it didn't sound like he loved comic books anymore. At least he didn't like reading them anymore. Kind of back to my daughter, she and I are still reading lots of Legion of Superheroes and drawing our own comic books, or drawing her own comic books. And some of the characters that really tickle her are, as one of them is Matter Eater Lad. I don't know how much, you'd have to have read a lot of Legion of Superheroes, I think, to have heard of Matter Eater Lad. But he just eats matter. That's his superpower. And I don't think he can even do it super fast or anything. But she just loves, we throw Matter Eater Lad into our conversations a lot. He hardly appears in the Legion because I think there isn't much he can do. Sometimes he appears for a panel in a story or something. Another of her favorites is Duo Damsel. But she doesn't like Triplicate Girl. This hero used to be Triplicate Girl, and then one of her copies of herself got destroyed, and so then she became Duo Damsel. And this comes up a lot because we've also, on YouTube, we've discovered this old, or not so old, Legion of Superheroes cartoon that they had, and in that they have Triplicate Girl, no mention of her losing a body and becoming Duo Damsel. But my daughter just greatly prefers Duo Damsel over Triplicate Girl, and I don't know why. So, and she and I have had a lot of talk about the difference between, or identifying, Marvel superheroes and DC superheroes, and we talk about all the heroes in the DC universe and the heroes in the Marvel universe. And she recently told me that really the the Legion of Superheroes was different than the rest of the DC universe, and they seemed to her more like Marvel characters. And I'm not sure what she was thinking, but somehow at a gut level, I feel like I know what she's saying. But why are the Legion of Superheroes more like Marvel heroes? I don't know. And maybe it's because they're less big and less iconic or something than Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. You got Matter Eater Lad, you got Bouncing Boy, and Phantom Girl and Saturn Girl. Anyway, that reminds me that I really enjoyed a discussion between Agent 42Q and Minutia Man, not Minutia Man, I can't stop doing that. Minutia Minute, Sean Beardo, on their new channel called Graphic Issues 616. I wrote it down over here so I can see it. And their first episode, they've had 2 episodes. Their first episode was Batman versus Superman, and they were talking about the differences, and they really put their finger, I felt, on a big difference between Marvel and DC, which is, and forgive me guys if I've got it wrong, but what I took away from it is superheroes at DC, and they were talking about Batman in particular, are these kind of ideas, and they're not really characters, so that you can radically change them easily, and you can go from radical change to radical change and just play with the idea of them. Whereas a character like Spider-Man is really more of a character, and you have to, if you want to change Spider-Man, you have to evolve him. You can't just radically one day decide, okay, now we're going to do a different, dark, gritty Spider-Man. You have to evolve him into that. And that kind of connected with me as to why even though I used to love Marvel, I find it hard sometimes to go back to it. And it may be that the characters have evolved, and I have a certain idea of their character in my head. But when I turn to DC, I don't have this strong character-based idea of them in my head, so I can accept whoever they are now. It's harder for me to accept that Spider-Man isn't the same Peter Parker as I remember. Or, when they mess with the Fantastic Four too much. Ben Grimm and Reed Richards and the rest are certain characters in my mind. So you guys should check out that video. Another thing that I was thinking of, and this just kind of developed out of listening to their video, is about how I want to be buying more Image comics and other indie comics, and I do like them, but I do keep coming back to the Marvel and DC comics and the big iconic superheroes. And the reason is that the indie comics do a lot of good things, but for the most part, they aren't creating these great characters who are going to last for decades. There's a reason certain characters have lasted for decades and decades and decades, and there's those great characters or great character ideas or situations don't come along every day. So any old new comic book that's being made up, 9 out of 10 of them or 19 out of 20 of them are not going to be these great characters that you can hang a million stories on. So there's something about there's a reason why these big companies have invested over the years in these particular characters or particular ideas, because they're great ideas or great characters. And so there is value in that. And the value has been built up by many creators. And sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen can ruin things, but other times there's a refining and a perfecting that can go on with a lot of different people having worked on something. So in a way, I can't see, just giving up on the big characters forever and becoming an only kind of indie reader kind of guy. You could see in some interviews with Greg Rucka as he was leaving The Punisher that he's kind of angry that in other Marvel comics they were going to take him off in directions that he didn't like, and I can perfectly understand that he feels like it's his character. He did this really great stuff with it, but it's not his character. It was created by someone else a long time ago, and it's been refined and changed by a lot of other people. And Greg Rucka's take on The Punisher was really great, but it's not his character. and whether he has the ability to come up on his own with a character as great as the Punisher, is a really open question. I haven't read any of his independent stuff, so maybe he can. I guess I'm going to look for some of it in trade because his current Stumptown comic seemed way overpriced to me. Another interesting thing, kind of along the lines of creator-owned stuff, is an article I read discussing the lawsuit of the creators of Superman's heirs against DC Comics. And this article claimed that over the lifetime of Superman, that in fact the creators and the heirs together have been paid maybe the modern equivalent of $14 to $16 million for that, which is not bad. And if it's true, and they did sign away their rights, perhaps they haven't been treated so badly. According to this article, Siegel and Schuster, basically, although they were given like $140 for the initial rights to Superman, DC Comics, or whatever company it was back then, until the mid-40s or late 40s, was giving them lots and lots of royalties on toys and other things like that. And I know that for a long time their studio, where they had other artists working along with Jerry Siegel or Joe Shuster, whichever one was the artist, was pumping out most of the Superman stories. So they were getting most of the business. And then apparently in 48 or 49, they tried to sue DC, and that's when they got cut off. And although they had made a lot of money up till then, I guess they spent it all. And so then by the 70s, they were quite poor. And so it looked bad to DC when the Christopher Reeve movie came out. So they gave them a big settlement then. And now their heirs are looking for another big settlement. And so if that article was true, maybe they have already gotten, the money they deserve. And maybe if they weren't always suing DC and wanting even more, they would continue to be getting a good amount. I don't know, if that article was completely accurate. And I'll search for it. I'll try to search for it and put a link down below also. So yeah, those have been some of my thoughts. I think the reason why I think about the whole creator rights thing and the big comic book companies, because if you look at it from a certain angle, with the idea that the big companies have always, totally ripped off and screwed over their creators, that you just shouldn't buy any comic books from them. So maybe all these various little ideas I've thrown out here are my rationalizations for, continuing to buy Batman or Superman or Captain America or the Fantastic Four, Thor, Spider-Man, there is something good about the iconic characters. You can see them as cheesy or cliched, but there's reasons why they've lasted so long. So, well, I've gone on longer than I thought as usual. I hope this video is okay. I feel like even though it's so long, I feel like I've been rushing through it because I'm afraid I'm too sleepy and won't express my ideas well. But let me try to do some shout outs while I'm at it. Oh, dang. Excuse me a moment. So I'm gonna. I also down below I want to link to a really good video by redvitaminblue that really touches on kind of the childhood emotional and imaginative growth as a person that comic books connect to. His video really connected with me, so I want to point it out to you guys. It's down below. Lately, I have been watching. Where's my history? I've been watching Graphic Issues, Dragon Hearts Collects, Dark Avenger C86, White James Brandon, Mongo Stomp Time, Andrew Cutter, Jal Ghul, Jal Ghul, Why Not Art, Lovable Varmint, Howler Mouse, Oddfellow Thoughts, Mr. Addy 75, Ghost Critic, Roger 69501, a number I could never remember. Mercenaut, Poet Skinny, he's back. Minutia Minute, Cali Collectibles, Comics SGW, James Donnelly, Davidus Raccoonus, Captain Cummings with his giant life-eld shoulders, Crom de One, Mr. CDC Amp. I used to think it was Mr. DC Camp, but it's Mr. CDC Amp or Mr. CD Camp. Solid 4ST Bend. He's the one who had the really cool art he did with the Joe Kubert School. Agent 42Q, David Lee, Greco Fabulous, Gambit 896. Yeah, those are just some of the ones I've been watching recently. So I hope you're all well. And Comic Book Corner, Jim Supreme. Who else? Yeah, so read 'em, Steven. I'll talk to all of you guys later.